So where does some of this criticism stem from, and what are some of your criticisms of it? Perhaps we can start there.
Can you hear me? I see this? I think one of the things that distinguishes our Nuit Blanche is the corporate logo in front of it. And I do think that is probably going to bear out in this conversation a little bit today. And I do think it has an impact on how our events get planned and presented. And the other distinguishing thing is that, well, particularly when the idea of Nuit Blanche was first presented to me in 2006, which was based on the Paris Nuit Blanche, what was shown to me was a very large, glossy, and also critical catalog that was related to the event, which made me, and there was some discussion in the early beginning of the event that this was also going to be an event that would lead to some kind of greater critical discourse around public art in Toronto within the theme of public art, which also hasn't happened. And I don't know if that happens still in Paris or other conventions, but that is something that distinguishes it for me from how it was originally intended.
Okay, yeah, that's something I want to return to, sort of the dearth of criticism that's produced around it, or discourse that happens around it, I guess. Because it's an event that's known, of course, by its very nature for its brevity. But that means that there isn't a lot of discourse around it, because why talk about things that are gone, right? But it's a selling point, but also it's the cause for its critical dearth. And so I wonder, does the event incur a kind of violence in a way that we can't quite return from, or we don't quite know what to do with after it's all said and done and sunrise comes?
I would like to clarify. I'm not sure what we mean by like a lack of critical response. I feel like it's in all the dailies, it's in all the weeklies, most of the magazines cover it. And I would say the failing is a lack of international press, although I gather that's changed a little bit. Did you get some other things recently?
But it's also mainstream kind of
journalism versus art criticism too. But yeah, that's an important feature of the event. Is like it comes in the dailies, but it's difficult to find the opportunity to deal in depth with any single work in an evening that presents hundreds of works, I guess.
It just feels built into me. I don't know. I don't ultimately have a problem with that. I feel like if someone wants to write about it critically, it's there. It has happened. I mean, Nicholas Brown wrote a good piece for the cover of C a couple of years ago. I wouldn't say that it's lacking coverage.
Okay. David, how do you feel about that as an art writer? Do you think that it gets enough play? Or the right kind?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there's some things to say about sort of what my editors demand of me as a writer on the occasion of Nuit Blanche. I think that Nuit Blanche is, I think, among the few events that I can be guaranteed work around. It will be Nuit Blanche and Contact. Those will be the two that are sure best. As an arts writer, a visual arts writer, I've been at Nuit Blanche every single year since it started. There's no choice. There's one year I had to go to a wedding. But it feels like work for me. Every year it feels like work. Last year I was tweeting all night. And I have to make sure that I go see as much stuff as possible. Last year was a lot better because I had a pass. But I can say, I mean, I don't want to, it's not a good thing for writers to second guess editorial agendas, because often writers are much more neurotic and sort of invent scenarios that their editors can't speak to. But I will say that, and I'm an editor too, but I will say that, I don't know if you guys saw this, but my feature story for last year's Nuit Blanche was on Sarah's project, Reunion, and I did that in combination with kind of a very bitty, we do like sort of a bitty survey of Nuit Blanche artists every year, kind of like lunchtime poll. I thought it was a fascinating project, which is why I chose to write about it. So that's all I'm going to say. I'm not going to extrapolate further, but I think that a lot of media outlets want to hear about things that people have planned and not necessarily about criticism surrounding it, whether it be kind of like in-depth consideration, like intellectual consideration of the pieces, or for that matter, post-mort editorials, which I've done before, and again, don't want to get into too deeply, but my more scathing editorials, the last one, which I wrote while I was editor there, I think only got published because I was art editor.
I think one of the considerations is that Nuit Blanche belongs to the culture of festivals as opposed to the culture of fine arts exhibitions. It's a different scenario that way, and you find the same thing happens in film criticism as well. When there's coverage of festivals, there's two types of reporting on it. One is a kind of critical engagement with specific work, and then the other one is a pure kind of social reportage on the nature of the evening and what guests were there and who was around. So I think, we have to treat Nuit Blanche as a festival scenario. That's what it is. It's a time-based event. It only lasts 12 hours. There are very, very many works to cover. But there have been exceptions in criticism where people have dealt in depth with a specific work. And there are two types of functions to this event. And I think a larger question to examine is just the culture of exhibitions in Toronto as a total economy, as an environment, as an ecology, and that this is one component of it. So the larger discussion is actually what happens in Toronto the rest of the year and how is this event connected to what happens here.
Yeah, does anyone think that there's enough art criticism about things that are going on at any of the centres in the city, or I think the answer would be the same if we want to get the signal there?
I'm not really talking about coverage, popular coverage, giving face-to-face real estate to artists, which I think is effective for Nuit Blanche. It's more, again, the culture of exhibitions, which is an entire discourse in and of itself, particularly around public art internationally. And there's very little institutional memory for Nuit Blanche to Nuit Blanche that one can refer to. Actually, I know the pathetic amount of resources that are available that go into documenting and writing about Nuit Blanche from an institutional perspective, and fantastic that the CCBCA is the holding house of the documentation, but it's not very good documentation, and the sort of written critical analysis that one can sort of refer to from year to year in the way that I refer to over and over again, not to compare Nuit Blanche to Documenta, but, if we're talking about sort of expensive, large-scale cultural exhibitions that people put a lot of their intellectual effort into, it would be nice to have a sort of ongoing reference to that we can play off of from year to year, and that doesn't exist for Nuit Blanche.
To what extent do we need to create some distinctions between the audience, the artists, the critics, curators, and the way in which that discussion of criticism unfolds? So with regard to a very public, large format audience, the biggest in the city for anything altogether on that night, that mirroring that we should be giving to the public is somehow should be reflected in the way in which we conduct the discussion.
And I don't see the public as a unified body that we should address in one particular way across the board. And for the amount of resources that are not put into, again, the sort of cultural work in the city year-round, I would like to see a little bit more evening out of this sort of critical pedagogy that goes into the public and Nuit Blanche, and not just leaving it at the level that it exists right now.
In our last Nuit Blanche, in our book last year. We did talk about that, and I think
Yeah, what happened to
Well,
that?
more panels.
We did have this
I think it was resolved that there would be greater outreach on a pedagogical level. So, and that would be important, making sense of the event for the greater public.
And I think having a record or a greater record of the event would be important as well, because I do agree with you. If you try and go back to the first, the second, the third year, in fact, Fern Bear organized a 5-year anniversary exhibition this year. She had a lot of trouble collecting information about some of the projects because it is lost, it doesn't exist.
Well, and again, that presentation, you know, it was great that Fern did that and that the city wanted to mark that it was 5 years, but that presentation was, again, you know, 2-paragraph blip. You know, that's what the city can handle right now in the way of discourse, so.
I think I agree with a lot of what you're saying about, you know, there's something major being missing there, but I also really feel for what it takes to organize things and just the time that it takes to grow an event. So I feel like there's a lot been accomplished in a short period of time, and then it's, you know, it's always good to sort of stop and assess and have these, you know, discussions about where the priorities need to lie and then try to address those. And so I feel like, you know, I don't know how many years in is it now? 5? So 5 years in is a good time to kind of like stop and look at how something just made its first mark, but I think it really got off to a good start. And the things that are lost are a real shame, but I see it with like every organization that gets going and everything that tries to get off the ground has nothing in those first years. But it's, you know, hopefully something that can become more of a priority.
I mean, definitely, I concur, but on the other hand, isn't the essence of the event supposed to be fleeting, temporary, and a 12-hour-long event, not an event of historicization?
Although there is the possibility, I did a historically local-rooted project with the Reunion one, which dealt with a specific piece of Toronto cultural history to animate that. There's potential.
No, but I agree with Daniel. I think performance has a long history in celebrating ephemerality, and like you're not going to see it all. You're going to miss it. It's not going to be documented. But that's what makes it interesting. And I like that about it.
And the public goes out. I'm not speaking for all the public when I say that, but the public goes out, I think, with a kind of open-mindedness in terms of that they can't see everything and that they're going to stumble across, and of course they're going to dislike some things and they're going to like some things as well, but there'll be a sense of discovery.
I mean, I would love there to be a book, but I have a fear of 10,000 copies still in their cellophane seal in like the people who go to this, you know, they want to go out just as someone said earlier, maybe Sky. The main success to me belongs to the people like being outside in the middle of the night. And the art is not even secondary. There's like 3 or 4 things that you come before the art. It's sad, but we have to accept it. Like we know how many people are here. We know how many people come to the centers that we work for. When we talk about Documenta, like Nuit Blanche gets twice the numbers Documenta gets in 6 months in 12 hours. That's pretty staggering.
Yeah, it's fantastic, and I'm not saying we should do away with it. I'm just saying I'm less and less interested in Nuit Blanche as a company who's part of the cultural community in Toronto. And now Dread is going to Nuit Blanche.
I'm not really aimed at that, right?
I mean, I go because I'm fascinated by the event itself. Like, it's important to stay engaged in what's going on, what our money is being spent on, how artists are trying to actually engage with it. Of course, I go with dread instead of excitement.
But that point that Dave made is key. Maybe
not
it wasn't.
for me.
I know. But that maybe it wasn't clear before. We do need to distinguish that it is for the city, it is for that greater audience, and it's not necessarily for us to pass judgment on and to make.
I thought it was actually supposed to be a meeting place between what artists are doing and how they're working with the city. And
exactly.
Bringing people in to engage that with them.
That's a great way of putting it. And you're giving a gift to that audience.
That's the greatest potential in my thinking. One, it's the scale, right? Because this is not how, I don't know, none of us operate at the scale normally. But the greatest potential for me was that crossover possibility that's contained in investing this much infrastructure into this wider gamut possibility. The thing you hope for that, though, is that Canada, I'm going to say this, as a country at large, is not that well developed culturally. We can say that. We don't know our history, and we have a very limited sense about contemporary art is not incorporated into the public culture. So you sort of want this event to hold that potential as the first introduction or some exposure, right? So you'd like to think that if the city puts this much money into doing these 12 hours, that it could result in somebody walking into Mercer Union. Does it? I'm not convinced.
On the other hand, I mean, it's such a bizarre example, but we were teaching a grade 5 art class. We were guest invited by a school to teach grade 5 art class. And we had showed some pictures of our Nuit Blanche project from, I think, 4 years ago. And the art teachers told us afterwards that the school holds its own Nuit Blanche, because I guess the kids are a bit too young to be out on the streets running around.
Well, they do take field trips of older students to see Nuit Blanche.
Okay,
But yeah.
I missed that. That was really interesting. Here we are, artists going into participate in some public role, teaching these kids, but then also to see that the permeation of such a large event into the school, and that the awareness level is so great. We were thinking that some kind of impact is occurring on these young students or in that community. And to second what you were saying, the awareness levels will get to the point in terms of culture building that visual arts would be the norm, and definitely, hopefully, would be a good thing.
Do you think that it's going in that direction?
I think that there's the risk of the spectacle factor, and it's the overarching case, in that sense. And so, hopefully, we raise the subject of the educational factor, having panels. Maybe Jen Goodwin could ask a question at the end, or may have an answer, but maybe there would be some tie-in into the public school system, and there would be a cohesiveness in terms of education.
Do you guys has everyone attended Nuit Blanche recently on the panel? Recently? Yeah. So when you go out, you can hear what people think of what's going on. As somebody whose job it is to sort of voraciously consume the event, and as an art critic, I can say that most of what I hear is terrifying.
It's painful meeting your fellow citizens, really.
It's terrifying also because at times it feels as if it emanates from my own soul. But it's also terrifying from our perspective in terms of the impression that people are getting of what contemporary art is all about.
Can I just read something I got, which is actually an email I wrote to Dave the last time I was on the Nuit Blanche panel, and I think it sums up something better than I would now. So he asked us when we were doing this panel the last time, just to say something about Nuit Blanche to get a conversation going. So there's something really simple that I like about Nuit Blanche. When I say Dave, I mean Dave. There's something really simple I like about Nuit Blanche, which is experiencing art with a direct awareness of the outside world. The streets that I traverse to live out my life become as much a place to get groceries as they are an access point to higher metaphysical realms through art, imagination, and pushing my own physical limitations to stay awake. Time and change and decay and unruly crowds are as much a part of an art experience as a more controlled, austere gallery setting provides, for me. The frame of reference for the art and Nuit Blanche is constantly changing, and it's a nice, messy reflection of the idea that everything in us and around us is constantly in motion, never in stasis, always in a process of transformation. From the time Nuit Blanche starts, it's almost over. I like that you can never see it all, and that its framework underscores the impermanence of things. So I just wanted to say that because just because, I think that, because I more to art in a way than we can measure, and that we can hear, like directly.
Great, thank you. Do you mind if there's an interesting precedent in Brussels where the zones are so far apart that, and purposely so, that there is no possible way that a citizen or a city tripper that evening would be able to see more than one of them. So there's a kind of forcing there to relegate yourself to one curatorial vision and one set of artists, and to not be too ambitious and perhaps not to miss much, right? Because of course you're missing the other zones, but in the years that follow you'll situate yourself elsewhere, is the idea. And it's a fairly applauded model. I don't know the geography of Brussels. Maybe it's much bigger. I don't think it's much bigger. It's smaller. So that's interesting.
It's still an hour and a half to an hour and 40 minutes between some of the zones.
Oh, there you go. Okay. Well, so I wonder if, because I think a lot of the disappointment that stems from denizens who've taken Nuit Blanche here is all the lost time and frustration in getting between projects and the lines, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then there was that awful Yonge Street idea that happened, where there was no art to see. It was supposed to be a thoroughfare, but people just craned their necks at nothing and got stuck. So I set that up because I want to know, for those of you who have curated, who are here, and for those of you who have participated as artists, do you see curatorial visions being worn out? And if not, how can we work on that? And does this zone idea appeal to you, or do you have any other ideas that might allow for better cohesion, or rather coherence of vision?